Hey guys, so we're back here again with another video. Now this is going to be an interesting one. So I think there's a lot of times where most of you know that Anthony and I, we don't walk around with a camera crew behind us. There's a lot of, off guard moments that we've had with our friends where, we're either hanging out and people are always asking us questions, but those conversations never make it out to the light. They always stay private. We always have those one-on-ones with our friends. But I think it's interesting that when Anthony and I started in the industry as myself as a photographer, and Anthony as a filmmaker, as a videographer, whatever name you guys want to call it, we never really thought our friends would be doing what we've always enjoyed doing. So we have a very important guest, a very special person here, Alejandro. We've known him for a very long time. For those of you who've known us from the Wiston Park days, we went to Wiston Park together, went to school together. So I think it's very interesting that we have someone so close to us that shares that passion, and he's about to pick my brain. But before that, just introduce yourself and just tell people who you are and what it is that we're gonna.
Hello everyone, my name is Alejandro. I'm doing photography on the side, but I do work in a studio right now. I'm trying to learn more things. I'm blessed to have the Camels as good friends of mine, and with the experience that they have. Definitely they have inspired me to get better at the craft and improve and just go out there and just put myself out there and just start like a little business on the side. Really, they're really good mentors. I love these dudes. They're awesome.
We love you back, man. But okay, good. And I just want to say that we're very honored that you consider us to share the knowledge whenever you have questions for us. We really appreciate you coming forward. I know it's not easy for someone to do this with us, especially stepping out of the comfort zone, being in front of a camera. I think in today's world, everybody is so worried about what people might think of me if I don't say the right answer, if it's not encouraging or motivational enough. So I will applaud you, and not just in your commitment to learn this craft, to get deeper into photography, but I think you'll learn a lot about yourself when you open yourself up to this world. The arts are so subjective, and it's had to do so much with creativity and the imagination that it's all linked to your identity, you as a person. That's where that creativity is going to kick in for you. Mm-hmm. So I'm excited for that process for you. I think you're going to learn so much about yourself. I think you'll gain a much deeper understanding about life and just things in general, because of it's such an expressive industry, it really is, especially in photography. It's such an expressive thing for people. For me, I think in many ways God brought into my life, and it saved me. Photography was the most adventurous thing that was ever introduced to me. So I'm really excited for you, and I'm excited for those questions that you have in there. So let's just jump right into it, man. However you want to kick this off.
All right. So I want to say that when I started, I didn't really have anyone to teach me the way of photography, or teaching things that you should know, but I didn't know. And I was just, just taking pictures, shooting my shot, you could say. I started off taking pictures on the phone. That's how I realized that I had a passion for it. I liked taking pictures of, scenes and stuff like that. Ever since I was young, to be honest. But then I finally, pulled the trigger. I bought myself a camera, and I wanted to get to that next level. But of course, I didn't know about all the different settings and all the different things you need to know. I have some questions for you.
Go right ahead.
These are things I feel other people would probably have questions about as well. Start off with, what is ISO?
Okay, so a lot of people, when it comes to the exposure, when it comes to the settings and the cameras, I know it can get very daunting, but I would say the three biggest things you should know is going to be your shutter speed, your aperture, and your ISO. Now, a lot of people, when you're in a very, not such a formal format, they'll tell you that ISO is fake lighting, but ISO is how sensitive your camera, your sensor is to light. A lot of what photography is controlling light, is being able to grab what the camera is trying to expose and just make sure that there's a balance in there. For in more technical terms, people will describe that as the exposure triangle, which is made up of your aperture, your shutter speed, your ISO. I would say that your ISO has to do. There's two terms we'll reference a lot when it comes to talking to ISO. You'll hear noise, grain. Your ISO, I wouldn't say it's the most important thing, but it's definitely up there, because if you shoot at a very high ISO, you're gonna start noticing a lot of noise, a lot of grain. It depends on your camera. Some cameras can get very sensitive to the light that's coming in. The price difference, you're gonna feel it, but some cameras can't handle high ISOs. Some people will push the boundaries. So a lot of people, sometimes in church photography, during worship sessions, during concerts, you'll see people pushing ISOs upwards of 4,000, 3,200, and it has a lot to do with your experience too. Like, do you trust yourself to push those boundaries? Because a lot of the fundamentals in photography, when I was learning them at first, I would break them. When I first started learning photography, they would say, hey, don't shoot anything lower than 1/20th of a second, because if you move too much, you're gonna get that motion blur, and just a lot of things are happening. You're shooting a subject, a preacher, or the artist just moves a lot, and some people, because they're nervous in the environments that you're in, you might not be able to stay very still. But you find yourself breaking a lot of rules, pushing your ISO, really going very slow on your shutter speed. And a lot of the technical sides of like ISO, shutter speed, and aperture, you'll see how, like, for example, aperture, you can think of it in terms of like how your eye sees, the refraction of light, how much of your object is in focus, like the bokeh. Yeah. Obviously, you'll see, a lens that's like, I can go as low as 1.8, but you see that price. But I think us talking about it, maybe we can show some of the work, some of the lenses that you've seen some of our personal gear, and you're like, how do I get to that? And for me and Anthony, it was so hard because we lost all of our equipment. Not lost, but it got stolen. And just starting from zero was one of those things that's like, man, I'm so used to shooting at 1.2 super wide open. I can't do that now because I don't have.
The passion pushes you forward.
But the passion pushes forward. Mm-hmm. So I would say there's a lot of amazing photographers out there. And I don't want to butcher her name, but I think her name is Amy Levitzowitz. She does a lot of portrait photography, a lot of studio work. She's shot for the Queen, the Obamas, a lot of big celebrities, entrepreneurs. She dabbles in the most creative aspects of photography. And I think that's the beautiful thing about it, is that you can learn the technical and not be super great at it. But I think if you have that level of creativity, it will probably take you places that maybe just learning the technical might not take you.
Because take you further because you have that key component.
100%.
But thank you for that.
Yes.
I love your explanations. They're awesome. They have little stories to them too.
Always
helpful. Let's start like from the beginning. Let's say you're starting off in photography, right? What's like a good lens to start off with? Even camera. I know like the gear can cost a lot of money.
Yeah.
But like, let's say for a beginner, you want to get into it, you want to start off. What do you recommend? What do you need really? Because you don't want to blow money on things you don't need.
100%. And I think that we have to be very smart with our money, especially when it comes to investing into things that we are going to be investing so much time and resources into. You want to make sure that it also has the capacity to take you wherever it is you want to go with it. I will give you a personal story. When I bought my D800, God bless that camera before it got stolen. When I had my D800, I was already doing photography for about 4 years into that point. I bought my D800 and I bought the cheapest 50 millimeter I could find. I mean, that thing was just pure plastic. And I remember, I'm like, man, this, I've shot with the D800. Why don't my shots, look the way that they usually do when I take pictures at church on a Sunday. What's going on? And you would think that 4 years of photography would have, said, hey, like, don't make that new mistake. But I would say you need to keep a balance. If you buy a very expensive camera and you don't put enough money on glass on your lens, it's not going to work out for you. You're not going to see that difference. So my mistake when I first started was buying a D800 with a really cheap lens. And when I would go, and when I was doing photography on the side, a lot of my work was at nighttime. So I realized that having a very cheap lens was not helping me either, because I really needed to go to those very, 1.8, 1.2. I really needed those really low numbers to help me out a little bit more, because I was too afraid of even going super slow on my shutter. I didn't want to bring my ISO too high. So having those extra stops in my aperture would have helped. But because Mr. Andrew Campbell here was more concerned about buying a D800 and didn't do too much research on the lens portion of things, it bit me in my rear end, for a lack of better terms. But I think that the lens and cameras are it's gonna vary. What do you want to do? Portrait photography? Do you want to shoot landscape? What is it that you want to do? What do you have a passion for? There's so many endless possibilities. But I would say I love primes. I love primes.
You're telling me that.
85s, 50, 35 millimeters, love them. But there's a lens that I was introduced to maybe a few months ago with Sony, and I hope I'm not butchering this, but I believe it's from Tamron, made for Sony mount. I believe it's a 35 to 150, and it's a variable. If you go super wide, like all the way to 35, the aperture goes down to 2.2 or so. And I usually think that 24-70 was one of, if anything, the most versatile multi-purpose lens. But now shooting with that lens kind of opened up my world a little bit. And when I go serve at church and I'm shooting on a Friday night and I'm doing all the worship sessions, I love using that lens because I'm not restricted. If I can't get too close because of cameras and maybe people, and I know that if I put myself in the place as a photographer, I never want to steal someone's moment, especially in the environment I'm shooting. I don't want to be the reason. I want to capture the emotions. I don't want to be the reason why you got sidetracked, you got stepped out. So I would say that when it comes to
ruin the experience.
Exactly. And when it comes to lenses, you have to think about those things. Hey, am I comfortable enough getting close to people? When I was training, when I used to work at church, or I would train friends of mine or volunteers, I would always have them start off with the 35s or 50s, because I wanted them to get as close as they could, respectfully, in a respectful distance, to their subject. Because it's very easy to grab a 7200 and stay a couple feet out and never get close to your subject. But I think there's something beautiful that happens when you get close to people. You get to step into that, what they're feeling. That's perfect. It's a very personal thing. And being a part of that as a photographer, I think is so special. So I think when it comes to the lenses, you pick something that is affordable, good quality. Maybe something can go as low as 2.8. So if you do want to do some nighttime photography, some portrait photography even, you can go to those low ranges. You can go to those low numbers, and you have some light to work with, some natural light that you can allow to come in more. But I think get the lens that it's going to cause you the most amount of inconvenience, because you don't want to become a lazy shooter. You don't want to be the type of person that's too timid. Something that photography helped me do, I'm even now I'm very shy, and I don't have a very I have a very tough time sometimes getting close to people, breaking the ice. Photography has done just wonders when it comes to that area of my life, because it caused me to get closer to people, talk with them. And when you don't have those lenses that you can just stay far and just kind of snipe people,
you can peek from the background and stuff.
It's kind of trained me and conditioned me to get really in there in those moments, get close to people, get the tears falling down, and just really get the details right. Your gear is an extension of you as a photographer. And I don't want to be a nerd here, but it's kind of like Star Wars. Like, you must become one with your equipment. Like, it has to be a part of you. I remember I would always take my camera everywhere I went because I wanted to make sure I knew that's my tool. I would say that I'm going to war with this equipment. I'm going to, as a creative, you struggle so much. And these cameras, this equipment, they become such a big part of your life that whenever you're going through these moments, you're struggling as a photographer, you hit like this creative roadblock, even when you're at these events shooting, it's a part of you. And you have to know inside out the weapons and the tools that you're going to war with. Like, that's such a big part of your life. And as a photographer, you might not be doing photography, you might take a break, but you're always going to be, once a photographer, always a photographer. There's no stepping out of that. You always
have that eye.
Yeah, and it's a claim, and it's interesting how your eye develops. That's why I'm saying that gear, you need to pick the right gear because you want to make sure that the equipment as well is aiding in your process of growth, especially as a photographer, as a creative. You want to make sure that your equipment also has a purpose. The purpose of allowing you to grow, the purpose where it has the capability of facilitating what you need. Because there are some environments we're going to step in sometimes that the equipment that we have, it might hinder us in certain ways. And if you have restrictions or a photo pit, things might get very intense and very difficult and very complex in the most shortest amount of time. So I don't want to say, hey, get a 24-70, get a 50 millimeter. Get the lenses that you know for sure you're going to use. If you're doing portrait photography, I would recommend get the primes. 50 millimeter and 85 millimeter. I love those two. This is one of my favorite focal lengths. I really like those ranges. If you have money to go to a 24-70 afterwards, do it. I think there's a lot of cool things you can do with it. I do a lot of multiple exposures, so sometimes I like being super wide so I can really capture all the lights that are around the worshipers or the artists that are singing or playing the guitar. But that's more like in depth, that's more advanced.
Technical stuff.
When it comes to beginner, I would say let's start with some primes, get used to getting close to people so you don't have that roadblock, you don't have that limitation later on when you get into the rooms where you're going to have the conversation. You're going to have to, hey, can
I step into this moment?
Exactly.
And capture it.
Perfect. That's a very good way of putting it.
So build on your creativity, build on stepping out of your own comfort zone and stepping into other zones.
Yeah. We also can't put the blame, or we can't allow the equipment that we have to be a handicap or a limitation. We have to be able to push these cameras and these lenses to its full capabilities. I mean, if you're gonna be dropping $300, $400, you better be using this thing, and you better become very familiarized with it, because a lot of people buy equipment and we see all the memes all the time, like, hey, I'm gonna spend, $1,600, $1,800, $2,400 on a 24-70, and it's like, hey, you better fix all my problems. No, it's not. And you have a lot of people that have expensive gear and don't know how to use it. So it's okay to be humble and not have all the expensive equipment up front. Stick with the primes, and then you can start moving yourself up from there. My 50 millimeter, as much as I really disliked it, it really conditioned me to become a very good photographer, because when I was able now to step into, you would say, the bigger gigs, the rooms with the art and the celebrities, I was so used to shooting with okay, mediocre gear that when I actually had access to the expensive equipment, you become a lot more self-sufficient, you become a lot more confident in your skills, because you know what it is to shoot in low light conditions with not so okay gear, or not so good gear, I should say. And once you actually have access to the expensive stuff, and I would even say it doesn't make too much of a difference, because your creativity has been exercised to a point where no matter what equipment they put in your hands, you can get the job done. And I think that's why stepping out of your comfort zone and being comfortable, being uncomfortable with the gear you have right now, and there's a difference, it's not becoming complacent, but it's fighting through the
struggles and the roadblocks, because low quality gear really pushes you to work around it.
Exactly.
And it's not going to work with you sometimes.
And you learn to be patient. Your timing gets better because even though, and I'll say limitation, but it shouldn't be. The equipment could limit you in some way. Yeah. Once that experience starts going up and that creativity starts to grow, what you considered a limitation, it's a blessing because it's what kind of triggered and it's what gave birth to that growth. So now in tandem, in essence, yeah, the gear was complicated at first to work with, but because you learn to work around it and you learn to trust the equipment, even though it's not what you wanted, you start to see that once you start being exposed to different types of equipment, it doesn't change, your quality doesn't change, your quality of work doesn't change, because now you're conditioned as an all-terrain photographer. Like, it doesn't matter what equipment you have in front of you, I can get the job done. I can get close to my subject. I can do whatever it is I'm being tasked with, and I know that the creativity is going to flow regardless. I'm shooting with a $500 lens, an $1,800 lens, and you'd be surprised what creativity can do, especially with cheap equipment. I have a buddy of mine. His name is Andres, and that dude is one of the most creative people I have ever met in my life. I mean, not just in photography. And me and him have conversations all the time because he doesn't have the money to buy expensive gear, but anybody that would see his work at first glance would say, wow, this guy must have a lot of money, and you'd be surprised the equipment that he shoots with. And it's just his creativity, his drive, the motivation. So I think
he makes it work no matter what.
So don't be so stuck on the gear. Now, I know I'm not going to be a hypocrite. I have a Z7 with a Z2470. My first camera was a D100. I was spoiled a bit, but I would say that I've shot with the D7100s. I've the D600s, and to me they're amazing cameras. Some people might say, like, they're not that good. No, those cameras are amazing. I know what it is to shoot with the Rebel Canons. I've shot with that gear. Luckily, God blessed me with my first cameras at the 800. Loved it, and to be honest with you, it spoiled me because a lot of people don't have access to that. Yeah, like, and not just the features. It's an all-out, really nice camera for portraiture, for landscape. Very beautiful camera to work with. I just shot myself in the foot because I bought myself a plastic 50 millimeter. They even have a lens cap on it. It's like those little plastic little covers that it just stuck on the teeth. And it's like, yeah. So
I like how you explained that the gear, no matter, like, you can start with like even bad glass, and it can still, it's gonna push your creativity because you don't have those fine-tuning adjustments that the higher lenses have. Like, I started off with a used lens. I bought used, a 24-70 with a Z's coating. It was a Sony lens.
F4?
Yeah, the F4, you remember. But now I recently got the G Master 2 24-70. That's 2.8. Very nice. It just came out. It's a beautiful lens. The clarity is amazing. But I started seeing limitations on the older lens I had. I didn't get the quality I wanted. I wanted to shoot at night, so I needed a wider aperture. And I was struggling with night shots. So I'm like, okay, so should I pull the trigger and get the nicer glass and trade this one in? Trading in is also an option when you don't need it anymore. But it really helped with the creativity when you have to get up and, like, personal with the subject or whatever you're shooting. It really just, it's awesome.
And it makes a difference.
It's awesome, it's also horrible, but
But it makes a difference when you are surrounded with good people. One of the things that I had when I first started was, I mean, you know this, I would have grabbed, we weren't even old enough to drive when I first started photography. Get like bus passes with 6 and 7 of our friends, go to Miami Beach, and just take pictures, like portrait pictures of all my friends. That's how we found all the rooftops, and it makes a difference too when you have someone that's willing to work with you in front of your camera. It makes a whole world of a difference. So I would say surround yourself with good people. It's not just the equipment. Surround yourself with friends that maybe you have a photogenic friend that every group of friends, every group has that one friend that really likes, like, their pictures being taken. Yeah. So you grab that friend, you go and the critique you're gonna get from your closest friends might be the best critique ever, because they're not gonna cradle you.
At least
from the guys. Yeah. But you know what? I've had really I've had really good female friends of mine that I got to shoot growing up, and that we served together in church, and they were the most honest, the most brutal and ruthless when it came to my work.
Yeah.
And I loved it because, your ego takes a hit, but you learn and you become a lot better for it. You really do. You really do.
It really, like, what's important about photography is the feedback you get. You need to get honest opinions. Sometimes asking your mom or dad or your family is not the best option, because they'll be like, oh, look how beautiful. Yeah, compared to your shots, mom, on the phone, it's a lot better. But you need to make sure you have your composure. Where you're taking a picture of, it needs to be like, do you have the right angle? Just different aspects. Is the height right? Could you have shot the picture lower or higher? And also, there's an aspect of, when you're a creative person, not everybody sees it how you do, or your friend does. Some people will not like your shot at all. Some people will love your shot. You can't really let that negative talk or that negative energy take away from your creativity. You have to keep, you like what you like. Some people, not everybody will like it, and that's okay. You can't let that stop you. All right, let's continue with some more questions. I want to talk about depth of field and bokeh.
Okay.
I know it has to do with the aperture and the lens and stuff like that we already talked about. But for people that don't know at home, what is the depth of field? And how does that affect bokeh and stuff like that? And that's more for portrait photography, the bokeh, but explain a little more on that.
So your depth of field, it's already in the name. I think there's three technical, the terminology. You're going to hear a lot of foreground and your background, the space between your camera, your subject, and the background. Sometimes you want distance. Sometimes you want that depth. You're going to notice too a lot of distortion at times when you're really close to a subject, or there's a background that you want to really blur out. It's what do you think it's a lot easier to blur out? A subject that's closer to the backdrop, or that's farthest away from it? And it's attention to detail. I would say that depth of field has a lot to do with your foreground, your subject, and your background. I would say it's creating that distance between what's behind, between what's in front of you. And I think the distance is good, especially for portrait photography. Sometimes you'll have your model super close to an object or close to a wall of flowers, and maybe you do want the flowers. Maybe you don't want it so blurred out. Yeah. The farther away you move that subject from that background, the blurrier it's gonna get. Especially if you're shooting very shallow, 1.2, 1.8, you're gonna start seeing that focus go down and down and down. The closer they get to that backdrop, to that background, the more in focus more of that area, that surface area is going to be. So I would say, what's your mission set? What do you want? What's your task? What is you trying to accomplish? And I know friends of mine that don't like bouquet. A bouquet, they don't like it. They really don't like how it looks.
The weird select few.
Yeah, the weird select few, and usually when I've gone to take pictures, it can get distracting.
Yeah, it can. Yeah.
So I think it's a balance. It definitely
depends what your creativity is asking for.
Yeah, and it depends what you want to accomplish too.
And also what the client wants as well. But that's when the feedback comes in, and it's very important.
Yeah. Which is the communication has to come in before you jump on these shoots. What do they want? What don't they like? I think you'll learn a lot from what they don't want. Some people are like, oh, I like this. Yeah, okay. What don't you like? And I think you'll find a lot more there.
Yeah, and there's some people that just say, oh, every photo is beautiful. You're like, thank you, but it doesn't, it's not an opportunity for you to grow as you want it. It kind of leaves you a little weird feeling. But for the next question, I want to ask about shooting in manual. A lot of people don't know what that is, especially starting off. I've seen people just shoot auto. There's nothing wrong with it if you're giving your camera to someone to take a picture of you if they don't know. But should you shoot in auto or should you shoot in manual?
A lot of times when people are learning, I have read so many books and I've listened to so many photographers that have recommended for many beginners to either shoot on aperture priority mode or on auto. And I would say, as professionals, most of the time when we're shooting concert photography, church, or portrait, I would like to say that 99% of the time for the select few, we're shooting manual. We want to have as much control over my aperture, my shutter speed, my white balance. I want to have control over everything in that camera. Now, I know there's going to be some people, yeah, but the camera does all its internal stuff. Yes, I know. But when it comes to the exposures, when it comes to the settings, the technical side of photography, the aperture, the shutter speed, you want to have control over those things. There are times when you are doing time lapses that you might want to shoot an aperture priority mode, and you do have beginner photographers that maybe they don't have an in-depth grasp on the exposure triangle, or again aperture, ISO, shutter speed, and they might need some help on what it does when it moves, when we play with the numbers.
Yeah.
So some people might, okay, well, I want my aperture controlled, or I want the camera to just automatically expose my shutter speed. That's fine, but I would say always have the goal to transition into manual shooting, because that's where you'll have the most learning growth, the most control. You'll finally understand what your camera is doing, and I think as a photographer, you do want that control. I think you really want to be in control of what you can do. When you're shooting on auto, your camera is going to give you what it thinks is correct. What it thinks it's correct. When you start stepping into creative atmospheres, you're shooting at nighttime, the camera might not understand your goal, your mission set, or what it is that you're trying to do. So it's going to get to a point in time in your photography journey where you're going to have to switch that dial up and hit that M and go to manual and pray to God that you didn't get comfortable in the other modes. Because what if you want to do long exposure? What if you want to do multiple exposure? You're gonna have to take that camera out. You're gonna need to be in manual. So in order to break those rules, and for me, I would say you will get a much deeper and rich experience if you step into the manual side of things. So,
okay. So, manual mode's the way to go, and you get more familiar with your equipment, your camera, and what you really need.
And I don't want to alienate anybody who's not shooting manual. It can be daunting sometimes. It can be scary learning the technical sides of photography, but there's no shame in shooting manual. It doesn't make you less of a photographer. I've seen people shooting auto and just the angles, the aesthetic, it's just really beautiful. So don't cut yourself short. Invest into the knowledge side of things, and you'll be all right.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Yes.
I have quite a few more questions still to go. Shooting at night. I have experience when I was starting out shooting at night. My ISO would be, you put it too high, you see the pixels, you see the grain, and then the clarity is just not it. So how would you explain how the ISO affects you at nighttime?
So it's not just the ISO, it'll be the shutter speed too, it'll be the aperture. I think all of them in tandem will play a significant role at night. Yes, sometimes, some people like grain. Sometimes depending on what you're trying to do, the grain might not be something that would look bad, because there's a lot of pictures that if you go see on my Instagram that were shot at night, you will see the grain, but it looks supernatural. It'll look supernatural. So I would say that if you're shooting at night, what do you want to do? You have flash. Some people don't know how to shoot with a flash. That's okay. What I like to do, find the neon signs, find the street lights, find those pockets of light that you can put your subject into, and then you can get creative with the camera. You can get creative with the posturing and what they're doing as a subject. So I would say you can try to push your ISO at night. Don't do too much, but sometimes that grain gives you like that film effect. It looks very cinematic. It all, I think, boggles down to creativity. If you have a good lens, go to that 1.8, go to that 1.2 if you can, and don't be afraid to even lower your shutter speed a little bit more than what you're used to. I think there's times where and especially when it comes to photography at night, like shooting at night, especially models, find the pockets of light and play and study the light. Play with it. See how is it going to look if I drop my shutter speed, or so you got people now because of maybe they're limited with equipment, maybe it's too dark, they weren't able to get what they wanted, and there's very a few things they can play with. You'll see people turning now to long exposure and multiple exposures to get like all those light peaks and those trails of light with the models, and you see people even using the headlights of their cars.
Yeah.
There's a lot of shoots that I've done that I would probably encourage people to go see if they can find it. There's an album of pictures on my Instagram that people thought I was using a flash, and it was the rear brake lights of my car. And I just, with the editing and just how I had her, that's the hint, her positioned, it looked really, really nice. But I think if you can master shooting at night, you can practically do a lot in many other environments. I love exposing people, especially beginners, to nightlife photography because it can be so complex that if you learn shooting in that environment, things will get very, very interesting for you.
Yeah, that nighttime shooting really pushes your creativity.
It does.
It's just to a new level, especially with the challenges that you face. One more question. What is shutter speed? Like, any tips when you have to lower your shutter speed so much at night, but you don't want like a super long exposure shot? What things can you do to help you not get that shaky image, that blur thing? You want clarity, but you have no other option but to lower that shutter speed.
I have friends of mine. I got friends of mine. There's someone that I admire so much, and someone that I've helped train, and someone who I would be blessed always working with her and having her as a second shooter. Kim. Not too long ago, I was serving at church and she was shooting at, I think, 40th of a second. And the shots are still coming out good. Now, she's very experienced, but she trusts herself there. Now, shutter speed is when you think it's in the name. If you're shooting DSLRs, I know with the mirrorless, it's a little bit different to see it, but when you're shooting with your regular DSLRs and you see all that glass, which is the light coming in, and you hear the shutter, that, or I mean, that's me reenacting a shutter sound, but when you hear that, the shutter, so the amount of time that the shutter stays open or closed. So shutter speed, if you're shooting at a slow shutter, the shutter stays open, allowing a lot more light to come in, creating a brighter image for you. The faster that shutter speed is moving, the faster the shutter speed, the less light it's allowing to come into that camera. So I would say if you're doing long exposure, you're gonna want a slow shutter, but get creative with it. A lot of the rules in photography, a lot of the fundamentals, you're gonna break them, especially when you're shooting in environments where you don't have enough light. And if you have a task to do, you better start getting creative because you have something you need to deliver. So I got friends of mine that are very comfortable shooting at 40th of a second. I also have friends of mine that will shoot double their focal length, which is also a rule. As long as it looks good, my subject is sharp, I will go as low as I need to go. If I've exhausted all my other options like ISO and aperture, but I have no problem going really low. If you go see my work on my Instagram, a lot of it is long exposure because I had no other option. The lighting environment was so
restrictive.
That I said, you know what? All right, let's just be 100. Now I might not be able to give you 120 shots, but I can give you 15 solid long exposure shots that will be creative. Not to say, hey, like with reposts, it's gonna be super cool.
Yeah, it's gonna be a nice shot.
So.
Well, that answers all my questions for now.
Yeah, man.
I will be back. We'll see.
We'll definitely do that.
Really appreciate it, brother.
Yeah, man. Anytime, dude. Anytime. All right, peeps, so we're wrapped up with this amazing conversation. It was such an honor and privilege to have Alejandro here with me. I love this dude so much. I'm so grateful that we're able to be this type of help in his life and his photography and creative journey. And I think it would be really nice to have him here again. If you want to see maybe me teaching him how to edit on Lightroom, maybe we can do like a 24-hour challenge of how he would edit his shots before to compare to after I get my hands on him. I think that'll be interesting. If you guys have any questions, if you guys want to jump on here and have a conversation like this, let's do it. Go crazy on the comment section, hit that like button, subscribe, and just we will keep saying it again and again and again. Thank you so much for watching. Anthony and I are extremely grateful for all the support, all the views. Thank you guys for just your unconditional love to this journey that Anthony and I are embarking in, this new chapter in the business and Young Wild Dreams. So God bless you guys. I hope everyone stays safe, and we'll see you guys on the next one.